I am Lynn Whitesides, and you are listening to Gospel Tangents.
It's the best source for Mormon history, science, and theology, and first daily Mormon history podcast. I'm Rick Bennett. I'm excited to have Lynn Whitesides on the show. She was the first person to be punished for her writings and speeches at Sunstone back in 1993 as a member of the September 6th. We'll talk more about her recollections of that event, where she is now spiritually, and more about her life and the events around it. So you won't want to miss this conversation. Check it out. Welcome to Gospel Tangents. I'm so excited to have one of the original members of the September 6th. Could you go ahead and tell us who you are and where we are?
I am Lynn Whitesides, and I was the first of the September 6th.
Okay.
And we are at the University, the Utah Valley University in Provo.
Right.
Are we in Provo?
Actually.
We're in Orem. We're in Orem.
Yeah, we're in Orem.
Yeah, we're in Orem. Yeah.
So. Well, very good. I've been doing this podcast for 8 years now, and this is our first time talking.
Yeah.
So you're hard to track down.
I don't know, but I'm glad to be here.
Well, thanks. Well, as we look back on this, can you talk about the events? I don't know how far back it goes. Does it go back to the 80s, or was it just really concentrated in the early 90s that led you into trouble with church authorities?
Well, I can go back a little farther, even in my own, with my own, but I don't know that we want to go there. I'll start from when I moved from Chicago to Salt Lake City.
Okay.
And when I did that, my friend Lori Stromberg, and do you know Lori?
A little bit.
Yeah. Lori said, why don't you...
We're Facebook friends.
Are you okay? She said, why don't you volunteer for Sunstone? And I had 3 little kids, and my husband was doing his residency, and he had gotten his residency here in Salt Lake. And so I went down and I volunteered to just be one of the people who helps at Sunstone. And at the end of that symposium, so that was 84 or something like that.
Okay.
Then I think Marty Bradley had a talk with Albert Peck and said, we think Lynn should be the new chair of the symposium.
Oh.
So they invited me to be the chair of the symposium for the next year, which I did from, I did it for 4 years. So whatever the 4 years were.
Oh, you were the leader of Sunstone?
No, I was the chair of the symposium.
Okay.
Albert was the editor, and Daniel Rector was the publisher. And then there are like Marty, at the time her name was Marty Esplin, her name is Marty Ashby now. She was an editor. There were it was a really cool crew that worked there. Connie Disney.
So this was after Peggy Fletcher Stack?
Yes, and just right after when Albert took over.
Okay.
Yeah. And it was so much fun working with Albert and Daniel because I had no idea how to pull a symposium together.
Okay.
But Albert in particular was so gracious and helpful and just kind of showed me the ropes. And by the time I was done 4 years, I could run a symposium. So it was kind of great. Yeah.
Well, it sounds like, because Sunstone, and correct me if I'm wrong, it seems like it used to be a magazine, and it seems like Peggy was trying to get people to write for the magazine, and she started the symposium, and now the symposium is like the whole thing. Like, there's not that many people that read the magazine anymore.
Well, see, I don't even know. I don't follow the magazine anymore at all. I mean, I haven't been to the symposium for years, since 10 years after, and then this year because I hadn't been invited to speak. But but those 4 years were really kind of heady because Peggy that's what she was trying to do. And we were getting a lot of professors from BYU and the University of Utah, but also just all kinds of really interesting people.
Mark Hoffman would have been one of those people.
Yeah, that was the year before I took it over.
Okay.
And
so that was the year, like he had made a big discovery that he announced at Sunstone, wasn't it?
Yeah, I believe it was either 2 or 1 year before because Steve Christensen was kind of part of Sunstone at the time too, right. and I had just kind of met Steve, and then all that stuff happened with Hoffman. So
yeah, well, Steve was killed in '87,
yes.
I believe, right?
Right. So and by '87, I was doing the symposium. I was chairing the symposium. 87, 88, 89. So 4 years.
Oh, so did you know Steve pretty well?
No, I was just getting to know him a little bit, and then that happened, yeah.
Oh, that's terrible. That's such a terrible thing.
Yeah.
So you didn't really know Mark Hoffman either?
No, not at all. I mean, I probably went to his talk or something, but I had lived in Salt Lake, then I moved to Mexico for 2 years because my husband did 2 years of med school in Guadalajara, then went to Chicago for 2 years. And I'd gone to Sunstone a bunch before then and then didn't during those 4 years. And that's when all that was going on.
Okay.
And then moved from Chicago to Salt Lake City. And that's when I started working for them. So you see, I was kind of in and out.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. And so you led Sunstone from like 85 to 89 or so?
Yeah, something like
right?
that. I wish I knew. I should have checked before I got here.
okay.
But yeah, I didn't lead Sunstone, but I chaired the symposium.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, because you were the Lindsay Hansen Park of the day then, right?
I think so. So, but it was working. Just working so closely with Albert and Dan was super. I mean, it was they had so much input because Dan Rector.
Oh, Dan Rector.
Dan Rector knew a lot of people because of his dad.
Okay.
Like Hartman.
Rector.
So
Okay.
so he was the publisher at the time.
And he was a former general authority.
Yeah. Well, he was. Hartman was at the time.
Oh, at the time.
Yeah. And then Dan. So Dan knew a lot of. He knew Paul Dunn. He actually knew what was going on with Paul Dunn and confronted Paul Dunn.
Oh.
Which was an interesting story if you want to hear it.
We haven't gone into the Paul Dunn
Yeah,
story.
we don't need
This
to, but
is great. We did do tangents here.
Okay, but we can. I mean,
Give a little taste of Paul Dunn. I really want to get Lynn Packer because he's written a book on Paul Dunn.
oh, okay. So what happened? I think Lynn was part of this. I don't know how much I knew Lynn, but I knew of him because we were doing all this stuff. So we had begun to understand, Daniel in particular, that a lot of the stories Paul Dunn was telling were not true.
And Paul Dunn was a former general authority.
Yeah, he was a general authority, and he was sort of the folksy general authority that everybody loved.
Wonderful speaker.
Great stories. Talked about being in a foxhole and holding his best friend while he died.
And he was a minor league baseball player.
Was a minor league baseball player. So we found out the name of his best friend who died. Daniel found him and said, do you know Paul Dunn? And he said, yes. And he said, were you in a foxhole with him? And he said, that never happened.
Oh.
So Dan...
And you're still alive?
Yeah, you're still alive. And I remember the story, if I can remember correctly, Dan was at the church office building and was in an elevator with Paul Dunn and said to Paul, look, we know this is going on. Paul was doing a lot of business, bad stuff too. But he said, we know this is happening. And Paul Dunn basically said, well, I was just like, wasn't an actual story. It was kind of a metaphor kind of thing. And Dan was like, yeah, I don't think so. So all of that was going on. I mean, it was a kind of interesting time, with Hoffman and then Packer Dunn and then, Packer being so angry and mean and going after anybody that didn't agree with him.
Packer.
Yeah, Boyd, yeah.
I think Lynn Packer and Boyd is Lynn's uncle, I believe.
I think so too, yeah. So all that was going on, and I remember Dan trying to give Paul a chance. Paul Dunn, look, why don't you come clean, and then we won't have to do this. But he didn't, and then I can't remember who broke the story. It might have been Sunstone, but it was so long ago.
It was probably Lynn Packer.
Well, but he was talking to us, and there was some kind of connection, and it came out. But Dan tried to give Paul an opportunity.
Yeah, to come clean.
Yeah.
But, yeah.
And then they made him emeritus instead of doing anything else. So, that's what we did.
They retired him.
Yeah, retired him. You lie, go away. So, yeah.
Wow, you had quite the experiences there with Sunstone.
Oh, it was really fun and exciting and loved going to work. It was really great. Yeah.
Wow. Was that like a full-time job for you then?
It was full-time really in the summer, but there was a lot of work before, preparation, getting papers, sending out the call, deciding which papers we wanted to do, and then doing all the stuff. Because at that time, we had maybe 1,000 people coming, and we had several hundred concurrent sessions. I mean, it was a really interesting time because everyone wanted to be part of it, right?
Right.
And then we would always bring in some sort of big name outside of Mormonism religious scholar. Those were fun too. We brought in some really great guys and women, and it was fun to meet them and hang out with them, and just so.
Well, they still do that too today.
Yeah, they do, but at the time, I don't know what they do today, but at the time, that was part of the real fun for me, was meeting some of those people. So. Can
you think of any big names?
Well, Ewart Cousins was one. I don't know if you know who he is, and then I'm getting old. I can't remember his name. He's a big Jungian guy now. Thomas. I have to think about it. But yeah, so I mean, we tried to get Elaine Pagels. I remember that I actually talked to her.
I would love.
But
Elaine
she
Pagels.
had some kind of tragedy in her life, and we couldn't get her. But we've had I'd have to go back and look, but we had pretty wonderful scholars coming and chatting, and then we'd go out to dinner. Anne and Barry Ulanov, who were very big Jungian, they were authors out of the New York Theological Jungian School, like stuff like that, which was right up my alley, stuff I was really interested in.
John Dominic Cresson was there just a couple years ago.
Oh, really?
You know John?
No, I just know the name, yeah.
Yeah,
So,
he's fantastic.
yeah. Well, it was fun because I got to I got to help choose.
Yeah.
You know, this is what I'm interested in. Let's get these people, right? So, yeah. It was great.
Cool, very cool. Yeah, I didn't realize you were the head of Sunstone.
You keep saying that, but just the symposium. I don't want that out there that I was.
The symposium is everything now.
But really, I chaired it. But to be really clear, Albert and Dan we were just always in meetings together and figuring out things together. But I got to bring in a lot of women's study stuff at the time. You know, so when I started chairing it, I was also really understanding feminism and that sort of thing. So I was bringing in people talking about feminism. At least almost every concurrent session, there was a session on women. There was also a session on being gay in Mormonism, and oftentimes sessions about the temple. So that stuff started coming in. It became really fun, but kind of controversial.
Well, and the temple stuff led to a statement against symposia. Was that during your tenure or right after?
Right, it was during so right after I can't remember if it was when we got kicked out or right before, but right around then they put out a statement that people at BYU couldn't speak at the symposium anymore.
Okay.
Yeah, and because of Packer, because Packer wrote that, that talk. Boyd, yeah, he gave that talk that said that there were three evils facing the church: feminists, intellectuals, and homosexuals. Mm-hmm. And that's part of the reason that was for him, the last straw, because I was on television and they asked me what I thought about that, and I said, well, if Boyd would get a relationship with Jesus Christ, we might get a Christ-like talk out of him. And then the next day, I got a letter for my court. Yeah.
For your court?
Yeah, I was on Chris Van Oker's Sunday morning show or something. So
this is 1993.
Mm-hmm. 1993.
And so was it August, September when you got that letter?
I got the letter in August, because it was during the symposium that I gave that talk. Okay. That I gave that interview, and because I was also the president of Mormon Women's Forum at the time, which was the feminist group in town, right? Mm-hmm. So I was doing that. And I was also the chair of the B.H. Roberts Society. So I was kind of doing all three of those at the time. So that's why I was invited to get on that talk show.
And so the key issue was the interview? It wasn't...
Well, there was probably more than that, because I'd begun speaking and saying how I felt. And we'd been in the LA Times, and I did a thing with Margaret Toscano and Marty Ashby, but at the time she was Marty Esplin. I think it was just the three of us. We did a performance piece where I kind of at the end, because Gordon Hinckley had said that we don't pray to a mother in heaven, that he'd written a letter, hey, Virginia, we don't pray to a mother in heaven. And I had said at the end that he needed to understand that that answers to prayers were not given by a man behind a pulpit, and that he wasn't more powerful than the God that made him, and that if we were praying to a female deity, it was because we felt drawn to do that, and that he had to understand that. And that kind of made him a little irritated too. So
I was just talking with Janice Allred, and she had said that Gordon Hinckley had kind of come after her because of she'd given a talk also about the prophet can't lead the church astray, and she disagreed with that idea.
They don't like that.
And so, and Margaret Toscano, it seems like Boyd K. Packer was very involved with her excommunication.
Oh, yeah.
And so do you know who was involved in yours?
Oh, Packer. Here's what happened after. So do you want to hear what led up to it?
Yeah.
So I was, the whole story is really kind of interesting. So I wasn't feeling really comfortable in my ward at this point. And so I had...
Just because you were outspoken?
Yeah, that was going on, and I was trying to understand some things, and I was, I'm a convert. I joined the church when I was 18.
Oh.
And so I just didn't know the culture, first of all. So when I went to BYU in the 70s, it was like 1970. That was a weird thing anyway, because I realized it was actually 1950 in Provo, and it's a strange experience. But so I didn't know the culture, and I just didn't know the rules in a lot of ways. They just aren't my rules from growing up, and I'm Italian, and that makes a difference.
Okay.
One time Paul Toscano said, yeah, they don't like anyone who's got vowels in their last name. The last letter of their name is a vowel, you know. So anyway, so I had, my home teachers had come to see me, and I told them, you know, I just don't feel like going to church anymore. And so about a week later, I got a call from my bishop that he wanted me to come and see him. And I thought, isn't that great? Look, it's working like my home teachers went, and he now wants me to come. And so I was taking some classes up at the U, and I left the class early, and I went down, and then he and the counselors were there, and they were in their suits, and I thought, wow. Honest to God, I was like, this is so great. So I sit down, and they say, this is what he said. Elder Lauren C. Dunn has asked us to call you in to see if we need to take some ecclesiastical action.
This is at BYU?
No, this is up here in Salt Lake in 1993, right? Like in May of 1993.
Okay.
And I just started laughing, and I was just like, you guys, you got to give me a minute. I thought you called me in here because you cared about me. And then something switched. They all kind of were like, oh. And so we had this lovely conversation. It was really lovely. And they said, I remember the bishop saying, I'm going to tell Elder Dunn that you're fine, you're a lovely person. And so that happened.
Oh.
And so then then in in August when I did that talk, I went and called him Boyd and said what I felt about that, you know, if he would have a relationship with Jesus, we might have a Christ-like talk out of him. I got that letter. And so when my my court happened, I was the first, and I was disfellowshipped. And 2 weeks later, the first and second counselors' wives came over to me and said, we need to tell you something. Those guys, the bishop and his counselors, were getting so much pressure from Packer to excommunicate you, and they couldn't because they liked you too much, and that is why you were disfellowshipped. But they actually were told to excommunicate you. So it was an interesting experience for me. And I was like, so Packer and Dunn were sort of they were doing stuff together, and they just were after anyone that they didn't feel like, I don't know, understood obedience or authority or something. Yeah.
Okay. And so Lauren Dunn and Boyd Packer were deeply involved. And then you were the first. So did that affect your church attendance?
Oh, yeah. I mean, yes.
Why would you
Well,
because the interesting thing is I've talked to Janice Allred and I know Lavina Anderson for 30 years have continued to go to church every week. Not so with Margaret and Paul.
No.
And I don't think you go to church.
No.
So tell us more about that.
I'll tell you a little bit about that. So I was just disfellowshipped, right?
Yeah.
And I got a letter from them from the stake president or the bishop or something saying, these were the things that I had to do to get back in the church. I couldn't speak in church. I couldn't teach. I could wear my garments. I could pay tithing, but I had to be really quiet. And I couldn't speak ill of the Lord's anointed, that kind of thing, right?
Okay.
But it said they had followed the handbook, which is really interesting because the handbook said at the time that if you're going to do this, if you're going to take a church action, you have to meet with someone a few times before. So I wrote back and said, you guys didn't follow the handbook, first of all. And I get a letter back and saying, well, actually, the bishop did. He met with you 2 times, one in May, and the other was at my church court. So I thought that was really interesting. So they wrote me this letter, and I wrote them back and said, just so you know, I have absolutely no intention of following your admonitions. I'm not going to stop speaking out. I'm not going to do that.
So they didn't want you to not just speak at church, but to speak at Sunstone or anything like that.
That would have been the thing. And I was like, nah, that's not my way. So I just kind of started doing something else, which is what I talked about in that talk that I gave. I don't know, but that's what I said, They told me to go find something else to do, and I did.
So you continued to speak out, because I know Janice, they put her on probation, and she said it was, even though it was probation, it was the same as disfellowship.
Oh, yeah.
And then they went after her about a year later, but they've never gone after you.
No.
Why do you think that is?
Well, partly because when I left, I was like, you guys go do your thing. That's fine. I really went down a different path. Okay. I wrote him a letter 2 years after I sent it to whoever was the president of the church at the time. And it was a letter of apology, actually, just saying, I just wanted to apologize to you because I had read a book and it had said, when there's been a lot of energy around, you might want to clean it up. So and this had seemed like a bigger thing than I thought it was going to be when September 6th got really big in a way that I did not expect. So I wrote him a letter and I just said, I am so sorry because I was so angry you couldn't have heard what I was saying. So please forgive me for that. And also, please forgive me because I was asking you to give me something that I already had, which is power as a woman. So please forgive me. So I sent that letter, and then they sent a letter back saying, come back to the church. And I just thought, yeah, right. And then I thought about it for a while, and I thought, maybe I would want to go, get back into the church and then leave quietly because I was kind of done, but there was this like energetic thing out there, right? And so I went to my bishop and I told him what I was doing and the work I was doing and how I was being, my life, and he actually said, I think the church could use someone like you, but I have to talk to the general authorities. I'll get back with you. I would love for you to come back. And then I never heard from him again. So that wasn't ever going to happen. And that was it for me right there.
Well, because I'm interested to hear more of your background. I think a convert to the church looks at the church a lot different than a lifelong member.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because Margaret and Janice are lifelong members of the church. Paul, on the other hand, is still a believer.
I know.
And a convert. So you said you have Italian ancestry.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
That's why you get along so well with Paul.
Well, I think maybe, but I just, I adore all of the Margaret, Paul, Janice. But Paul he's got that Italian humor, and it's great. It's really great.
I love Paul too.
Yeah.
I hope you enjoyed our conversation with Lynn Whitesides, the first of the September 6th. In our next conversation, we're going to talk a little bit about how she felt at BYU.
My second year at BYU, I got called in and they said, we think another university might be better for you. I think it may have been because I was hitchhiking to church and I was wearing, it wasn't a match. It just wasn't a match. And I realized it wasn't, so...
If you'd like to hear the entire interview uncut, subscribe on either Patreon or at gospeltangents.com. For just $5 a month, you can hear the entire audio uninterrupted. On our $10 tier, if you would like to see the whole video, you can see that either on youtube.com/gospeltangents, or I've got a special Facebook group devoted for full videos. So subscribe at gospeltangents.com and sign up for just $10 a month. For $20 a month, if you'd like to get some bonus content, maybe some of the stuff that ended up on the cutting room floor, you can sign up for that. And then if you'd like to talk to me for $100 a month, we'll do a monthly phone call on something like Zoom, and you can ask me anything you want. So thanks again. Also, don't forget about the merch, mugs, t-shirts, hats, things like that. I'm trying to get the ties up there. Hopefully I can get up there. And thanks again for watching Gospel Tangents, and click here for some more videos.